Hi, welcome back to Gen Z Bible class, where today we're going to get to the part of the story of Jacob and Esau that we've been waiting for. They're about to meet up after 20 years of being separated from each other and not having left on, let's say, the best of friends. So we're wondering what is going to happen now when Jacob, who is now, I guess in a way, sort of forced to go back home. Well, actually, God told him now it's time, after 20 years of working for his uncle Laban. Things weren't going so well there, and now it was time for him to go home. When he left, God told him, there's going to come a day when you will get to go home, and this is the day. But the only problem is, Jacob doesn't know what to expect. And the last thing he knew, his brother wanted to kill him, which is probably not the best memory to have. In the last time you saw your brother, he wanted to kill you. So he has all this apprehension, and we talked about how he made this preparation last week, about how he made this preparation to go home. He has this elaborate plan. Well, first I'm going to send a whole bunch of gifts to him, all these animals, and then finally my family, and I'll be the last one to leave to go meet him. So this is kind of the idea, the plan that Jacob has to best suit the circumstances, given all this uncertainty about what is going to happen. Will his brother still want to kill him, or will he open his arms and give him a big hug? That's what we're going to find out today. So let's start by looking at the first few verses of chapter 33, Genesis 33. It says that Jacob looked up, there was Esau coming with his 400 men. And so he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the two female servants. He put the female servants and their children in front, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph in the rear. And he himself went on ahead and bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. So, well, he didn't get killed, which is a good thing. At this point, we're still not sure about what Esau is thinking, but we do know one thing about Jacob, and that is that he approaches his brother in a very humble way. He bows down to him 7 times, and this is very different than when he left, because he always felt like, well, I'm the head honcho here because I'm the one that got the birthright, I'm the one that got the blessing. And let's just say he's been humbled a little bit, and he expresses that when he meets his brother, because again, he doesn't know what his brother's going to do or how he's going to respond. But there's another interesting thing about this particular passage that we just read, in how Jacob decided to greet his brother. Just the practical plan that he had in mind, which was to send his two, the Bible here calls them female servants. Now we know their names because we met them prior to this. And these are all the women, the 4 women that he has all his children through, beginning with these 2 female servants, and he divides them into 4 different groups. The 2 female servants, and then the next person to go is Leah, the wife that is actually his wife, but that he doesn't love so much. And then finally, Rachel, the one that he loves, is the last in line. And there's a problem here. And we're going to come to see in the future that this family, at this point there's 11 brothers, soon to be 12, don't get along that well. And one of the reasons is because you have this foundation, which is so clearly illustrated here, because he's sending, I guess you could say, the least important people first, and he's making it so clear who he appreciates most by the order in which he sends them. Because as we said before, he wasn't sure if Esau was going to kill these people, or what he was going to do to them, or take them as slaves, or who knows. So he sends out what to him are the least important. Now, if you have that attitude within your family, I think we talked about that before, that parents do not have favorite children because they love everyone equally. And when you have a dynamic like this where the children are clearly seeing what their father thinks of them, this is not going to bode well for the future of this family. And this is almost like prophetic. I'll give you a little hint. This plays out in a very clear way in the future, some things that are going to happen in the future. So this is how things, this is how things start out. Now, what happens with Esau? How does he react to all of this? We read in verse 4. But Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him. He threw his arms around his neck and he kissed him. This is like a wonderful reunion. And I think one of the lessons we learn here is that eventually time heals a lot of wounds. I think that's a saying. Time heals all wounds. And they both have had 20 years to put all of their past in perspective. And I think that's what is being expressed here, that they realize, they look at each other now and they maybe forgot all these, this inner turmoil and all their fighting, and they just realize, this is my brother, and this is my brother. And they have this wonderful embrace and reunion. But then it's almost funny. Then Esau looks at all these people and he asks this question: who are all these people with you? Because if you have to keep in mind the fact that Esau, as far as he knew, Jacob was dead. And he knew Jacob fled his home with nothing. And so, maybe initially he thought Jacob was just a part of this big extended family. He didn't realize until Jacob explains it to him, these are my families. These are my wives. These are my children. All this stuff that, I sent on ahead as a gift to you was all mine. And God has blessed me. 20 years. I know every once in a while I'll meet somebody that I haven't seen in like 20 years. You guys don't have that problem if you're Gen Zers. But it's just amazing to see how time passes. In some cases, people don't change at all. In other times, they tell you all these stories about things that happened over 20 years. So they had a lot to catch up on. I don't know if, this account is kind of limited in what we know, but you can just imagine them spending all this time talking with each other. So there's this dramatic reconciliation, and we see Esau, trying to comprehend all of these people and what this means and now who his brother is. It's like I'm meeting a whole new person here that I never knew before. Well, we continue on in verse 8, where it says, Esau asked, what is the meaning of these flocks and herds that I met? And Jacob answers, to find favor in your eyes, my lord. But Esau said, I already have plenty, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself. This is in reference to all those animals that Jacob had sent on ahead. Because before Esau meets Jacob, he runs into all these herds, hundreds of animals that are being sent. And he doesn't know what that's all about. And then finally he learns now that Jacob sent them on ahead as kind of like a peace offering. Well, it was a peace offering. And now it gets into this interesting conversation about, I've already got enough stuff. I don't need these gifts. And but then they're kind of arguing back and forth as to whether Esau would keep all of these gifts. But I think there's maybe an undercurrent that's going on here that you can appreciate when you kind of put yourself back in that culture. If you gave someone an elaborate gift, it usually implied that you were trying to establish some legal obligation to that person. And I think probably what Esau was thinking, and this is probably, male ego, I don't need your stuff. Because if he accepts these gifts from his little brother, it sort of gives his little brother a heads up over him. And out of his pride, maybe, plus the fact that he could say, I don't need your stuff. I got enough, look at what I've got. This is definitely something that relates to male ego. But Jacob, I think his perspective was, he gave him those gifts, well, first of all, out of fear, for one reason. But I think there was also an issue of guilt that was involved in Jacob's attitude with these animals. And that he felt, because of what I did, my brother lost, or at least he thought before he met Esau, that his brother might have been, for all he knew, he's living in poverty. I don't know. Maybe he lost everything. Fortunately, that was not true. And I think maybe he wanted to feel like he could restore to his brother the things that he now felt like he had stolen from him. But so they end up, Esau ends up, I guess they come to an agreement that Esau will accept these gifts. But I think this is kind of the underlying things that were going on in regards to that. Well, again, it's kind of a limited story, and we don't know if they spent a few days together talking and reminiscing and talking about old times, or we don't really know. But eventually they come to the point, and Esau decides he's going to go back home. He came down from a land called Seir, which was on the east side of the Jordan River. And he offers, the next thing that happens, before he leaves, he offers to leave some men with Jacob. And we read that in verse 15. Esau said, "Then let me leave some of my men with you." "But why do that?" Jacob asked. "Just let me find favor in the eyes of my Lord." So that day, Esau started on his way back to Seir. Well, I mean, this was probably a pretty sincere offer. Now, remember that they weren't the only people in this land. This whole land was full of Canaanites. We've been very much aware of that. And there could have been some danger for Jacob to just sort of show up and surprise everybody with this huge multitude of people and animals. I'm sure that made the headlines at 6 o'clock news that night amongst everybody. But there could have been a good reason for Esau to insist that he leave these men there, maybe as a matter of protection. But Jacob's attitude was, "I'm just so glad that you didn't kill me." No, I mean, he said, "I'm just so glad that the Lord has found favor, that I found favor in your eyes, and that the Lord has restored us." So that's the only thing Jacob was worried about. And I think he sort of implies here that Esau wants him to come up and, stay with him in the land of Seir. And but Jacob sort of politely refuses the offer, and using the excuse, which was probably true, that all my people, the animals and my children and the families, we've been, walking for days and days and days, and we're just exhausted, and we need to take a little time to rest. So they finally come to an agreement that Esau will go back to his home. But I think it seems like Jacob sort of implies that eventually they would follow him and meet him up there. But that's not exactly what happens. And we read about that in verse 17. Jacob, however, went to Succoth, where he built a place for himself and made shelters for his livestock. And that's why the place is called Succoth. After Jacob came from Padan Aram, he arrived safely at the city of Shechem in Canaan and camped within sight of the city. And then it goes on to talk about how he bought some land there. Remember, that was exactly what Abraham had to do, because he didn't own any land, and he had to buy some land to be able to bury Sarah so it could be his land. So the same thing is true here with Jacob. He ends up having to buy some land, and it's interesting that he didn't follow his brother. And I'm thinking that here, both of them are probably thinking, let's get practical here now. I'm not going to move in. My brother could go out and clear out the guest room in his tent, and we'll stay there. But, that just doesn't work so well. And given the size of their estates and all the stuff that they own, it was just like with Abraham and Lot. They had to separate because they had so much stuff. So it wasn't a practical idea for him to go and maybe even visit his brother. And plus, We have to remember the fact that Jacob is very much in mind of this promise that God had made to his grandfather and his father, and he knows that was passed on to him, that he would occupy this land of Canaan. So that is where he's heading. He's going to go over to the west side of the Jordan River to this land that God had promised his grandfather and his father. And so, interesting, when he gets there, it says specifically that he camped within sight of the city. You get the impression that he was there to stay, because he's building, it says he's building all of these shelters for his animals and houses for his people and himself. So he's moving in. I mean, I don't know if when he was in Padanaram with his uncle Laban, if he was moving around in tents or if they had permanent places. A lot of those people did live nomadic lifestyles, but in this case, he's putting down roots, and he's not planning on going anywhere after this. And but it does say that he kind of keeps his distance from the local people, and he sets up his camp within sight of the city, but not in the city. And maybe he remembers some of the lessons that what was his great uncle Lot had learned about getting too close to these local people, because that didn't work out so well for him. And I think it's kind of in a way, it represents a principle that is, again, kind of universal. That's what we're trying to find in these stories. In that is, as believers, we know that we are in the world, but there's this phrase that we are in the world, but we're not of it. And we have to be careful about how close we get to things. And Jacob had it just put in his mind that you had to maintain a distance from these local Canaanite people. After all, that's the reason he left to find a wife, because he knew it was wrong to marry into that population. And we also have to keep in mind the fact that what God is doing here is he's building a nation. And, what is a nation? It's a group of people that retain their identity. I suppose if I could do the math and say if I have 3 kids, which is what I do, and each one of them has 3 kids, and I could project 1,000 years from now how many people there would be, and I don't think the world is going to go on for another 1,000 years, frankly, between you and me, but theoretically, if it did happen that way, and I don't know, I think I did kind of some math about that when we were talking about how long it took the earth to be populated in the time of Adam and Eve. And it was amazing. After 1,000 years, there would have been millions of people. So theoretically, I could have millions of descendants given enough time, but they wouldn't be a nation anymore. I mean, you could look at any individual in history and talk about their descendants, but none of them would be a nation, because they just sort of dissolve into, whatever culture or language that they're in. But the thing that sets Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob apart is that they retain their identity as a nation. And I think that was one of the reasons why he was keeping his distance from the local people, because he knew he had this special, unique identity. And we certainly come to see how that works out. Well, that would be one principle that we can learn from this as Christians. We don't want the world to engulf us. We want to retain our identity as Christians, and we understand what that means when we develop our Christian worldview, that we stand apart from the world. That's one lesson. I think there's also a lesson we can learn about fear, and I can't help but think that Jacob spent sleepless nights in those 20 years that he was away, just dreading, having nightmares about the day he would have to go back and meet his brother. And we could tell, even as he made all these preparations, he's sending out the least valuable people first in case his brother comes and kills them all, then the rest of them could, flee. But fear has a way of doing that. And, fortunately, when he finally meets his brother, he comes to realize that all of that fear and all of that worry that had been, he'd been holding through all these years was totally unnecessary, because his brother didn't hate him. His brother opened his arms to him. I think also there's a lesson about guilt. When you do something wrong, it can eat at you for a long time. And I think as Jacob got older and he matured, and we talked last time about how when you're away from something, you have time to reflect. And now that he had left his home, he could think back about those days and reflect and think about, man, I really messed up when it came to my brother. I treated him terribly. And, so he's carrying this guilt, and that's why he sends all those animals to appease this guilt. I think we learned some very important lessons about family life and about favoritism, and how parents, this is a rule, parents do not have favorite children. We love them all equally. But we can see what happens when you kind of go against God's pattern for a family life. And we talked about how God might have had some reasons to have so many women, involved in the building of this nation, but it still comes back to haunt Jacob in the days to come, as we said. We'll see how that comes out. The other thing, and maybe we can kind of end with this thought, is that we learn some lessons about God's sovereignty. And in this whole process, actually, there was a prophecy that was fulfilled. And I don't know if you remember it or not, but when you got to the point where Jacob deceives Isaac into blessing him, he thinks he's blessing Esau, and he's really blessing Jacob. And then Esau comes in and realizes what happened, and Isaac realizes what happens. But he gives a blessing to Esau. And that blessing wasn't so great. But part of it did come true at this very time. I'll read that. And if you'll remember, that was in Genesis 27, verse 40. And this is what Isaac is saying to Esau as part of his blessing. You will live by the sword, and you will serve your brother, but when you grow restless, you will throw his yoke off your neck. And isn't that actually what happened? Because as long as Jacob was there, he was lording it over his older brother, because he had the birthright, he had the inheritance, he had the blessing. But now, after 20 years of separation, when he comes back, it's Jacob that's bowing before his brother Esau. And so that whole thing about you will throw his yoke from off your neck actually comes true. So we learned something about God's sovereignty, but I think also we learned something about God's attitude towards us, and we can see it demonstrated in the way that Esau forgives his brother. That finally he sees him as a brother and not just as a kid that bothered him and gave him all kinds of headaches when they were growing up. And he opens his arm and he truly receives him. I think those tears that were shed were genuine tears. And I think what we can see there is a picture of the way that God feels towards us. That we've done something wrong. I mean, this sinful nature that we've inherited is not pleasing to God. But nevertheless, he opens his arms in forgiveness. And he embraces us with tears when we come with a repentant heart to him. So there's all kinds of stuff in the Old Testament stories. But the thing that I think really speaks to me is the fact that these principles and the things we see happening then are really just been reenacted throughout history. And we are operating under the same exact worldview. So many philosophies come and go, and religions come and go, but these truths are universal and they're eternal. And we can appreciate that when we read these stories that have happened centuries ago, but the principles that we see in them are still in operation today. And we know that God loves us exactly that same way. So I hope this has been a blessing to you. And there's some more exciting things to come as we continue on through the book of Genesis. So I hope you'll be able to join us then. next time on Gen Z Bible Class.